going into, it's a new area for a lot of people, and it's really digital forensics.
Yes.
Okay, this is a traditional law enforcement. You're dealing with physical, things that you can touch, feel, you can test with chemicals. Tell us a little bit about your approach and how you feel about this new area, which is digital forensics, which you're engaged in.
What I've learned is people younger than me are a lot better at this than I am. They understand this to a T. This is extremely complicated information. To put one of these together, you can't just be a quote, novice. Even though I believe this was poorly done, you cannot be a novice. You have to have an in-depth understanding of the technical aspects of the software and what happens here. People that work with this stuff for a living, graphic experts. What I learned, I didn't know this when it happened, when this document was produced, within 30 minutes, graphic designers were all questioning its authenticity. It's because they worked with the software. Digital forensics is a science unto itself, but we also live in a very scary time. You cannot rely on your eyes anymore to believe what you see.
Good point. Okay, I'm just going to move down a little bit. Now, is there a hard copy of Obama's birth certificate available for you to look at? Are you guys in the process of, sequestering it? Or
to my understanding, if there is a hard copy document, no one other than select individuals from the state of Hawaii profess to have seen it. The state of Hawaii has some very stringent laws regarding vital statistics. And the only way that we would have an ability to see it would be to go to that state and request through court order the ability to see it. And even if we were granted permission to see it by a court, even by directive, the Department of Health in Hawaii could maintain the position of retaining the privilege not to produce it. And that's happened in some other court cases and unrelated incidents of other birth certificates where they just refuse to produce the document. As far as our position, a hard copy paper document is not something we want to see. I can make this into a hard copy. What the public has to understand is this becomes a hard copy at the press of a print button.
The short form birth certificate released in 2008 was uploaded to Obama's website. You familiar with that, and what are your thoughts?
I'm familiar with it. We did not do any extensive research on it. I do understand, though, at some point in time, other birth certificates were forged and actually uploaded. There's some speculation out there that a forged document by someone confessing to forge the document actually provided it to the White House. We haven't followed that up. Our purview right now is just to look at this long-form birth certificate because it is what the White House has put up on their website, and the President himself pointing to is saying, this is proof positive of my birth.
You as a law enforcement deputized or professional, whatever, in your position as a law enforcement agent, working for the people, at what point, where would you stand now if you seems to be a forged document, right?
Yes. So
the next step is where would you go from there? In theory, where could you go if this was a crime?
If this was a crime anywhere that's in my jurisdiction?
I didn't do my selective
Sure.
service, for instance.
If this were in my jurisdiction, obviously you want to find the individuals responsible for it. You would start the very last person that handled the document. It would be the person that uploaded it to the server that the White House released to the world. That would be the place you start, and you just simply work backwards from there. And how did you get it? How did you get it? How did you get it? And eventually you would find the person. That's provided there's cooperation. What would normally happen in a situation like that is people will either speak or they will tell you they want an attorney, and they'll end it right there. And then you have to find other means, other ways to do it. In a utopian world in law enforcement, that's how I would like to do it. I'd like to interview everybody that ever came in contact with this document, and I don't want to call it a document anymore, this file. It's an electronic file. It is not a paper document.
It's important to make that distinction.
Very big distinction. This was put together so the public themselves, this was put together so someone would look at this on a computer screen and go, oh, that is what it's supposed to look like. It must be real. That's the deception in this. This isn't real. This will never be real. this is a fabrication. This is false. And that's the fraud that's not only committed here in Maricopa County, but it's the fraud that's been committed across the nation.
So very important here, actually, the language that's used, especially when we're talking about digital documents versus physical documents. You as an investigator, how important is that you pin the right. There's other bits of language that have come into
Yes.
this case as well.
Well, pinning the language is really important, because if this were to be a physical document, if it started its life as a physical document, in other words, in the Department of Hawaii, they have this exact document in paper form, then obtaining that document would be very, very important to an investigation. Because once we got that document, then we can send that document to forensic document examiners to look at signatures, look at ink, look at some things on the document. The fact that it's digital means we are working with a file. There is no piece of paper for us to touch. And it becomes very difficult in an investigation when you don't have the original, quote, document, because it hampers the investigation and it hampers forensic experts from rendering opinions.
Did you come across any other anomalies with what you see there on that file with regards to against any other sample groups of any other birth certificates around the same time, for instance, from Hawaii through your investigation? Is there any other evidence you want to comment on?
Here's where it gets a little complicated from that end. And to answer your question, yes, there are some, but there are things that I can't disclose because it's an ongoing investigation. However, there is not another electronic file released of anyone else's birth certificate. I've had birth certificates sent to me from Hawaii. They are on paper. But I've had birth certificates sent to me from Hawaii that are not on green safety paper. They are just on white paper, a computer printout. And it's important for the public to understand that when Governor Abercrombie went out and said that he was going to prove Barack Obama was born in Hawaii, he failed to locate the birth certificate. And that's puzzling to us, because the Department of Health in 2001 went electronic on all their documents. In other words, they were all stored on computer. So the common logic would be, if I needed to find a document, I call down there and I say, excuse me, I'd like to have Mr. Obama's birth certificate. You press the button and print it out. Obviously, that didn't happen. They didn't have it. They went on a search for it. He couldn't find it. He went to 30-some-odd radio stations and said he couldn't find it. Then, lo and behold, a document miraculously appears in a book, a bound volume of birth certificates from 1961 on a shelf with 499 other 1961 birth certificates. And the story goes that they broke protocol. They took the document, made 2 photocopies of it, and that's what they sent out to the President of the United States. Our contention would be, is if that's all you did, we should have had a photocopy of this scanned into a JPEG file, or even a PDF file for that matter, and uploaded to the White House, and it should have just been a one-dimensional document. We believe it's manufactured to back up the story and give the impression that it was photocopied from a bound book. I can't go into the particulars. We do have, forensic information to back that up. The Selective Service Card, we were put in the direction of that, and that's actually been out for a while on websites and blog sites. People question the Selective Service Card. The Selective Service Card in and of itself, though, is problematic. It has a post office date stamp that once it's received at the post office, it is date stamped to be canceled. In other words, it's been received. The law back then, in 1980, as put forth by, I believe, President Carter, was that any male 18 to 26 was required by law to present themselves at a local post office, provide identification, fill out this card, and register for selective service. The card put forth on the internet was actually acquired through a Freedom of Information Act request by a former ICE government agent. And that individual put that request forward, got a little bit of a runaround. For a little while there, nobody could find it. Then lo and behold, they find it. Sounds very familiar, like the birth certificate. Same story. They find it. About a 10-day span of time goes by from the time they announce that they find it to when they send this to him. And they forward him the card. When he gets the card, he takes a good look at it, and there's that date stamp. The only problem with the date stamp is it should have said, I believe it was July 29th, should have said 1980 on a Hawaiian postmark. Mr. Obama says July 29th, 80. Looking at that stamp, it looks a little suspicious. We took the stamp to a number of retired post office workers. We took it to a couple retired postmaster generals, had them look at it, people that handle this stuff all the time, and they also agreed it looks suspicious. Doing a little more investigative research, we actually determined the stamp that was used at the time. We actually acquired a stamp. We actually acquired some date stamps. What it looks like to us is a deviation from the policy set forth by the Post Office and DOD that the date stamp used would have been a PICA 40 date stamp. That date placard should have been one solid piece of rubber and a 4-digit year date, 1980. Mr. Obama's is an 80. Another FOIA request was put forth, and this time the request was to see other Selective Service cards from the same time period owned at one time or privileged to deceased individuals, so now FOIAable. They could be obtained. We got 16 of those, 2 of which were actually in the same post office almost days apart from Mr. Obama's. All of those other date stamps, no matter how they were stamped or how they were inked, all had 4-digit year stamps, 1980. Comparing those, it became evident to us that the 80 on Mr. Obama's didn't line up like the other ones. It was offset dramatically to the right and low to the right. Looking at that, we had to try to come to some kind of theory as to what happened here. And it became apparent to us that if you were going to manufacture this date stamp, it's very difficult to go back and find a 1980 date stamp. It's some 40-some-odd years old. You would have to literally either go back in time and hope some post office had one, or wait to the year 2080 to get another 80. Well, that's a way off in the future. That's not going to happen. We believe what they did is they took a 4-year date stamp, 2080 for 2008, severed it in between the 2 zeros, cutting it in the middle, and then inverting it. So instead of 08, it now looks like 80. They load that into the handle to stamp the document. What they didn't realize is if that date stamp isn't cut true, isn't cut square, when you load it into the handle, it pushes against the little compartment side it rides in and would offset far to the right. And if it was cut on an angle, it would offset far to the right and low. Well, I replicated that, and to my astonishment, I reproduced exactly what looks like Mr. Obama's date stamp. I actually gasped. I was like, oh my God, I produced this. This is what they did. Our contention is there is just no way, no logical reason that anyone in 1980, no post office employee, would have any reason, especially mid-year, to tamper with a 4-year digit stamp. It sits in that handle for a year. Also on Mr. Obama's, you can see the circle of the seal is fully visible. It was pressed squarely down. I tried to rock it, move it, do whatever I could. You cannot get it to erase the 4-digit date stamp. So our contention is that is another manufactured document.
Okay. And lastly, has your cold case bossy team looked at or considered the President's unusual Social Security number from the state of Connecticut?
That has been plaguing us. We cannot come up with any information that says the President ever resided in Connecticut. I don't understand how a high school junior, I guess at the time, would have traveled all the way there to Connecticut to get one from Hawaii when you could just went to Hawaii and Social Security and applied for one.
It's normally the state where you were born. For instance, I was born in Omaha, Nebraska. I've got 033